Hey friends, it's Hush Virginia here. Haven't recorded in a long time, but I just felt inspired tonight to put up the video, and been doing some new writing. And um, as many of you, as those of you who were with me years and years and years ago, when I first recorded videos, would remember I had a son. At the time, I called him Pickles. Uh, I'm not as worried about folks knowing his real name now. His name is Jack, and Jack is now 10 years old. And I recently started a writing project where I would write Jack. I started writing letters to Jack, actually. And these letters were, well, you'll have to see. I'm going to read one of them now. Um, but the point of the letters is certainly to speak to Jack and to offer insight and wisdom and um, stories of who I am. But I think there's something deeper about them as well. Um, my hope is that they touch on aspects of life that anyone could relate to, ponder. I don't pretend to be like incredibly deep or anything, but at least be interesting and maybe cause people to look at life with a slightly different angle or ask a better question. So um, I thought I would read one of these letters. These are published. I'll leave the link in the description box below. Um, these are published on my site at Medium. So if you would like to read them, that would be really great. If you would go on and check them out on the link and um, engage with them there, that would help get them a little bit more readership, which would be cool. But honestly, I just thought maybe some of you would be interested, and um, also thought maybe it's rambly enough that it also might be really relaxing for those of you who, like me, listen to what are now called ASMR videos. And so, yeah, I will get situated, and you're going to see me kind of look off screen here. So, um, I'm filming this on my phone, but I'm going to be reading off my computer. So, anyway, this is called Letters to Jack number 1, Perspective. My dearest Jack, now that you have reached the age of 10 and are fretfully staring at the coming emotional and physical storm that is puberty, being filled to the brim with a volatile cocktail of anxiety and humor, intelligence and struggle, charisma and absurdity, it is inevitable that you will soon no longer desire nighttime cuddles and stories. I deeply wish you would not abandon these gentle intimacies, for they bring your mother and I more joy than you can imagine. Yet we understand that these too shall pass, at least for a time, until perhaps a day in the future, after some unexpected heartache or tragic loss, you come home to us and lay your grown adult head on our shoulder and weep and wish to be held. We will, of course, hold you and wipe your tears and remind you of how proud of you we are. And in that moment, we will find ourselves transported back to a time past when the nightly rhythms of embrace and story and laughter and tears that marked the first 10 to 12 years of your remarkable life were so embedded in our world as to be like a birthmark that one forgets they even have, because it always just there. Acknowledging this inevitable future, I have realized that perhaps there are stories, my stories, which you have not heard, and which you may one day wish to know in the offhand chance that they illuminate a little more clearly who your Father is, and perhaps within which you may find reasons why he believes and acts and behaves in the ways that he does. Ways in which at some moments appear so normal, whatever that word may mean, and at other times seem to approach the uncanny valley and leave you and other observers annoyingly off put, like discovering a picture frame that is ever so slightly off center, but which you cannot determine if the proper fix is to tilt it to the right or to the left, and so you leave hanging as it is and attempt to convince yourself that it is just right, despite the nagging sensation that it is most certainly not. It would be my hope, then, that after having discovered these reasons regarding your father's story, that you might also have a better understanding of yourself, of your choices, your loves, your passions, your hang-ups and failures. And with that understanding, you might become an even better you, a decidedly impossible task in the eyes of a loving father, but a necessary one all the same. My son, these stories are for you. Most of these stories are true. I say most because I cannot promise you that some small filaments of fiction won't be woven into the narrative, be they intentionally or unintentionally. They would almost always be small details, bits of dialogue, or perceived realities. It is perhaps the trap of good personal storytelling that minor fictive elements may become necessary in order to make a point, or to elicit laughter, or even just to fill the proverbial coloring page. Also, it is worth remembering that memory fails and fades, and in order to make sense of our past, we invent details that over time become memories themselves. I hope you understand. I know you're someone that cares deeply to know when someone is telling the truth and when someone is just joking. It's also paramount that you understand that these stories are told almost exclusively from my perspective and point of view, and thus, while true, are certainly incomplete. Perhaps some further explanation is needed for you to be able to grasp this, because it is vital that you do. Do you remember that scene in Star Wars A New Hope when Luke and Obi-Wan are talking in Obi-Wan's hut? And Obi-Wan tells Luke that Darth Vader betrayed and murdered Luke's father, Anakin. And then later in Return of the Jedi, once Luke learned that Darth Vader was actually Luke's father, Luke confronts Obi-Wan about why he didn't tell him. And Obi-Wan replies, "Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view." Now, putting aside the likelihood that George Lucas was making things up as he went, and had no idea that Vader was Luke's father when he wrote the first Star Wars script, I believe this statement from Obi-Wan is powerfully true. What we believe to be true is only true from one particular point of view. There's an old story that tells of several people looking at an elephant from multiple locations around the elephant and writing a description of what they see. When studied later in parallel, these descriptions will all be true, but the picture each description paints may be very different to the point that one may believe they are observing entirely different objects. One speaks of a thick, long, prehensile appendage dangling over a mouth. Another speaks of a thin, constantly moving tail with a tuft of hair on the end. And yet another sees what appears to be just a large gray mass that expands and deflates rhythmically. Put together, one begins to get a more complete picture. But taken alone, any one of the descriptions would be true, but incomplete, and thus not true, capital T. Now, please don't hear me wrong. I don't believe we should willingly fall into a relativistic black hole where absolutely nothing we say or believe is objectively true. That is a tempting path, and one that I flirt with frequently, but increasingly I've seen that the practical outcome of such a philosophical stance is that the most powerful and the most abusive voices win the day. Without some sort of fundamental truth to challenge the lies of the abuser, what hope do we have against the tyrant who declares that the only truth is his truth? However, I also resist the modernist notion that all things that are true must fundamentally be true for everyone forever. Our lives are simply too complex. There are simply too many angles from which to observe them to ever fully encapsulate and project them in glorious three-dimensional truth. There will always be the need for new angles, new perspectives, new points of view. Settling upon a singular truth is simply too dangerous and myopic for us if we have any hope of growing. And as I've said, it's my hope that you grow. There's a perfect example of this need for multiple perspectives and the danger of accepting a singular truth, which perhaps serves as a modern spin on the elephant story. There was a clever software engineering project that collected Google images of famous sculptures. By crowdsourcing hundreds and thousands of images and running them through a computer program, the engineers were able to create a three-dimensional virtual reality version of the sculpture that one could manipulate, spin, zoom in and out of. What they didn't expect was how many sculptures, once fully rendered, were severely incomplete. So what happened? It turns out people generally take pictures of famous pieces of art from the same locations. For example, everyone takes pictures of Michelangelo's David from the front and sides, but who, besides some teenager with a crude sense of humor, snaps photographs of David's ass? And yet, the sculptor spent just as much time and gave just as much care to the backside of the sculpture as they did to the front. As a result, the three-dimensional images of some very famous sculptures were only 50 to 75% rendered, leaving significant gaps around the backs. Son, I want to show you my ass. No, not literally, of course, but metaphorically speaking. I want you to be able to read these stories and come away with a high-resolution, three-dimensional picture of your father. I hope I can succeed at this task. It is also worth giving fair warning that some of these stories may be painful and heartbreaking. They may change your perspective on other members of our family. I hope you do not fall for the same trap I describe above and allow my point of view regarding our family to lock you into a singular truth of who they are. Mine is but one report on the elephant, one Google image of David. You will have to collect other stories and perspectives to gain a fuller picture of them. I will do everything in my power to offer an honest portrait and give a fair rendering of everyone who appears in these stories, but they are inevitably tinted and distorted by my limited perspective. I hope these stories make you laugh. I hope they bring tears to your eyes. I hope they are enlightening. But most of all, I hope you can grow beyond them and the limitations and challenges that were set before you as a result of these stories. Through my successes and failures as your father, be they genetic or social, nature or nurture. You are a bright light in a dark world. I am so proud of you and who you are becoming. You are my favorite and always will be. Your adoring dad. So that was my first letter. Again, you can check the description or the link in the description box below to read the actual text. And I realized as I started reading, this was actually an older draft, so the version that was published will have some really minor differences, some better phrasing and proofreading and stuff. But so you can check that out. And anyway, thanks for listening, and I will maybe do another video sometime, maybe not. I don't know. This was one of those things where I just kind of felt inspired this evening. So I hope you're all doing well, and have a good night.